Hey, everybody. I am joined today on the podcast by my buddy Seb Lavoie, who is a pretty certified badass individual on top of his 20 plus year career rather in law enforcement, doing some super cool stuff post retirement with private security, with running some gyms. He's a jiu-jitsu black belt. He has been the head jiu-jitsu instructor at both of our Operation Flowstate jiu-jitsu retreats, on top of doing the last one with only one leg after having his leg amputated, which is a whole story in and of itself. This is Seb's second appearance on the podcast. Technically, I guess his first on the Plant Medicine for PTSD podcast. He came on here back in the day when this was called The Way Broadly. Seb's apparently made over 2,000 podcast appearances, which is pretty insane. This one's perhaps a little bit of a deviation from the standard Plant Medicine for PTSD podcast flow. We don't just talk about plant medicine and we don't just talk about PTSD. I guess a little bit more along the lines of back when this was called The Way Broadly, and I just talked about interesting shit with interesting people. But Seb is somebody whose entire worldview, whose entire existence really has shifted post-retirement since entering the world of plant medicine. He's somebody who's dealt with his own struggles with PTSD. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I don't know if you would classify it that way, but I know Homeboy had some fucking demons that he's worked out. And he is, I would say, a pretty inspirational figure in this space, especially in the law enforcement community, but as well as, within the veteran space. He's somebody that a lot of people look to as a thought leader. He's somebody that people go to when they're struggling. He's somebody that I've gone to when I was struggling after witnessing a couple people die in this explosion that happened a little while ago and struggling with my own feelings around that. So it's always a pleasure to get Seb's thoughts. And as you'll hear in this episode, if you're not already familiar with him, he's a unique way of looking at things. Bordering on perhaps pedantic. I wish there was another word that was a little bit less harsh or insulting maybe. But just the way that he thinks about things is extremely interesting to me, the way that he breaks things down into principles and frameworks to conceptualize. And I personally took a lot away from this conversation about religion, faith, what it means to heal, how these things actually play out. So maybe at this point, I should just shut up. You guys can listen to me and Seb chop it up. So as always, thank you very much for listening. Enjoy this episode. Dude, I was reflecting yesterday in the pool, actually, with Sita, because we try to take her to the pool as much as possible. She's fucking obsessed with it. She goes, pool time, because we sing this little pool time song. Literally, she will open her eyes in the morning and go, pool time? Like, okay, yeah, we're going to go to the pool, hon. Anyway, I was thinking about everything that has come in our life and our business and just the world ever since you and I did our first podcast together, which I don't even know what the time frame was on that, but a couple of years ago, like going back in the day. And I mean, everything that came of it, like you came to 2 of our retreats now, being the head jiu-jitsu instructor for our plant medicine healing jiu-jitsu camps. You referred this dude Toby to us, which I feel like launched our microdosing business really, because we worked with him, got great results. He referred everyone he knew. You continued to refer everyone you knew. So part of me was almost thinking like, damn, I wonder what the next level will come after our podcast round 2. So not to put any pressure on it, but I expect really tremendous things to start unfolding as a result of this.
Got it.
Yeah. So no pressure, but come on, fucking do your best here. So listen, man, we went into a lot of like your background, your origin story, all that kind of stuff on round 1. So we can skip past that. And as we were talking off air, you've done literally thousands of podcasts. So ideally I can ask you some interesting shit today. But as we were also talking about off air, you were giving me a little update. So maybe you can just update our listeners. What's cooking for you these days? You've got the book that you're working on. You've got a variety of business contracts, some of which you may or may not be able to discuss. Mm-hmm. You are raising horses and donkeys and all kinds of little animals out there and having a good time on the farm. So just what's the latest in your life right now, man? What's going on?
Well, the donkeys is the best part, really.
Yeah. Are they actually?
They're awesome. Those are donkeys are animals you never knew you needed. is basically what it turned into. But also we have goats now and a little sheep, and the sheeps are interesting, man, because they follow
I
the
was going to ask
shepherd.
if you had sheep.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
do. We have one. Her name is Mary.
I was reading something just yesterday of like just a post about a guy who got into raising animals, and he was talking about how much he loves sheep, and he's like, I can see why religion is often framed in terms of like the sheep and the shepherd, because he was like, these little things that like they just follow you, they just trust you, and you just want to protect them. And I know that was actually something. All right, dude, we're getting way ahead of schedule, but this was something that you talked to somebody about at our retreat, this analogy of the
100%.
sheep and the shepherd. I forget who it was or what the context was, but like sheep have a negative connotation in today's society, like, oh, don't be a sheep. And there's this whole like sheepdog mentality of like, I'm a tactical protecting bro, right? So like, as another tactical protection bro, what do you make of that analogy? And like, why do you think people get that wrong? Because obviously, we'll talk about your faith, but the sheepdog, shepherd, sheep analogy is not a negative one. Or
Mm.
at least it doesn't have to be.
No, not at all. In fact, from an historical perspective, I mean, the relationship between shepherds and sheep historically has been widely documented, and I mean, it's an extremely powerful one. There's as early as last week, I was watching a video. It was a video on the social, and it showed people using, the shepherd's stick, the stick with the round edge.
Crook.
Yeah, the crook type deal, and they were essentially given that and going in front of a herd and attempting to get them to respond to them, basically calling them over, doing all the things, and of course, all of them failed miserably. And then all of a sudden, the shepherd goes and he takes his little stick, and as soon as he shows up, the sheep are running to him. They're all joy. They're ready for the day. They're ready to go anywhere he goes, and sort of inversely, the shepherd is responding to this in a very protective manner, in a very, I'm willing to die on the hill here. And this is something that was done, historically, where shepherds would, in fact, fight, wildlife coming to attack the sheep. And those sometimes were lions and tigers or what have you. And they would give their lives, some of them, for the sheep, for the flock. And so I think that people in an individualistic sort of society take offense to anything, if they don't have a little bit of a deeper understanding of the historical roots, or even what it means to be a shepherd in relation to a flock, and what it means to be a flock protected by a shepherd. So I think we just like to get offended with things instead of looking deeper into the meaning, the broader meaning, so to speak.
What was the difference with this actual shepherd? Why were they following him? Was he doing something different, or because the sheep just knew him and trusted him?
Yeah, that's precisely what it is. It's and I've had a first-hand experience with this. So, for example, the little lamb that we have, Mary, she's a lamb actually. She was discounted by mom because she had some issues at birth, and mom essentially walked away from her, and she was separated from the herd because they would bully on her, incessantly. And so she was always by herself in this little enclosure. And every time we visited to feed the goats, this was at my daughter's school, we would see her, and she would be calling us over. She would be crying, and she would be, doing the things that lamb do. And Alex, of course, get in there, and she's holding her, and she loves on her. And next thing I know, we're getting her because she's abandoned and she kind of needs it, we feel. So we we take her on with two goats at the same time. And Alex was bottle feeding her for the first little while. And so eventually what happens is this thing knows Alex. And as soon as Alex is in the vicinity, she's all over Alex. And if I'm there, it is completely irrelevant. She'll go right by me, or right in between my legs, and go straight to Alex. But the funny thing is right now we have a lamb that has a better recall than most of our dogs. Like, we can walk her down the road and she follows Alex, essentially in a healing position. Like, she'll just follow Alex everywhere. And so, of course, we had to do it. So now we're taking walks with our lamb, but it's just a very it was an amazing. It was an amazing sort of, what's the word? grand social experiment, so to speak, for me to see it firsthand and see what the relationship is and how strong it can get and how quick, on account of her being fed by Alex, on account of her being nurtured by Alex, on account of her being, loved by Alex, and it sort of put everything into perspective for me. But man, it's a cool thing. It's really cool.
Has raising animals given you any different perspectives? Because I know that you are a meat eater. So not that you'll necessarily turn her into lamb chops one day, but like, how do you square loving and taking care of animals with like consuming their flesh, other than it's super tasty?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, first and foremost, pets don't become food for me, right? Like if we have a pet farm, we're gonna engage in that in the way that we would with dog and cats and all of the things. Now, when it comes to sustenance, you'd be disingenuous, or at least if you said, well, I have a problem with the ethical nature of the killing or whatever it is, as long as it's done ethically, for me, I'm okay with that. We need it for sustenance. Hunting is another thing for me that's not only acceptable but preferable. But when I look at it as a bit of a spiritual experience for me anyways, and I won't speak to any every hunter out there, but for me, when I harvest an animal, it's a spiritual experience. This is almost like a gratitude that's being sort of felt as a result of the animal giving its life for the sustenance of my family. And for me to have a deep and somber and venerable respect for that animal, for doing that for our purposes. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but make sure that I take ethical shots, for example. What range am I at? Am I for sure going to drop this thing without suffering, or am I going to be potentially creating an injury system and now have to chase this thing down while it's suffering? All of those things are decisions, all of those things are sort of underpinned by my spiritual connection to the animal. And so the decisions that I make are generally in line with whatever it is that sustain life, but doesn't, create these massive conflicts.
Dude, that makes a lot of sense to me. In an ideal world, I would be hunting all of my food. I say that as someone who's never hunted, but I fucking love to. And that weighed into my decision not to. Actually, I was getting into archery back when I lived in Delaware. And I really would have loved to go bow hunting, but I knew that I was nowhere near skilled enough with the bow to take a responsible shot at an animal. And actually, an archery range just opened up around the corner from us here in Mexico. So maybe I can dust off those skills. We're speaking of like faith and eating. When you were at our jiu-jitsu retreat, it was interesting timing because it coincided with Lent for you guys. And so there are some menu restrictions. But something that we saw you guys doing was saying grace or saying a prayer before each meal. So that's a staple in your life now, yeah?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have I would say, very strong and very healthy prayer life that far exceeds meals. It goes on all day, really. It is the first thing I do in the morning before I take any step, before I get out, before I jump in my email, before I start problem solving issues, worldly issues as I like to call them, before I start getting my business things organized. There's one thing that happens. So at around 4:30 or 4:15 in the morning, I generally, if we're not working out, because sometimes we work out at that time, but if we're not working out, I will generally listen to a channel called Grace Oasis on YouTube, and this is really powerful prayers spoken by a gentleman that's incredibly compelling and just charismatic. He might be AI generated, but he does sound that way. And so I'll listen to this for about an hour and a half or 2 hours as I'm sort of in between dozing in and out of sleep, so to speak, and I can still process the information, and I can still hear. Often it will trigger dreams that are in line with whatever it is that's spoken about in the prayer, which is very powerful experience, very spiritual to me. And then what I do is, as soon as I get up, I will do my bed immediately, and then it's up to the prayer corner for my 20 minutes of prayers or whatever. So that generally entails, a bunch of formal sort of Orthodox leaning prayers that I will have written or in a prayer book, and then I will also shut the book off and have a prayer of my own. What it is that I'm feeling today. Have I woken up with all this anxiety? Do I have all these stressors in my life? What are some of the things that I can remove burden by sharing the burden and by, laying it at God's feet, so to speak, and just have this conversation. And then as soon as I'm done with that, then I'm ready to start my day. But generally my day will continue in that sort of vein, because I generally will have an hour or 2 hours of scripture reading in the morning. So one of the things that I really wanted to do was to take the Bible and the scriptures and additional scriptures and really sort of dive into them very, very seriously, and really, research and study specific portions of it, and just build upon my knowledge base, and really understand the content and what it is that I'm reading and what it is that I'm attaching myself into, and what it is that becomes the symptoms of my actions, or my actions becoming a symptoms of said scriptures, and so that I'm really capable of understanding them. And so that's been a great addition. So I will do scripture study, or Bible study, as I like to call it, an hour at least a day, generally 2 or an hour and a half. And then after that, I'm ready to start my day. So whatever it is that I got going on, podcast or international security business, or whatever it is, studies or book writing, it all comes after that. Now, as I'm engaging in life, so this morning, for example, my wife had a stomach issue, and she's at work, and she doesn't have time to go get meds and do things or whatever. So she's an hour and 15 away one way from me. So I jumped in the car, of course, went and got, probiotics and a bunch of other things, and drove to her. Well, when I'm driving to her, I have a prayer rope, which you have seen around my neck. And I will say a very powerful prayer called the Jesus Prayer, which is very simple. It's simply, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And it is a very, very incredibly powerful prayer in Orthodoxy. And one of the forefathers of Orthodoxy once said, the Jesus Prayer could get you out of hell. Literally, it's such a powerful prayer for the enemy's side, so to speak. And so what I do is, as I'm driving, say for an hour, I will be saying the Jesus Prayer all along, confessing, my worldly sins, the things that we do as humans that we don't even realize we do, judging others, or whether it's lusting, or, anything that will happen in a man's life. I will have conversations through my drive. And so that's an hour going and maybe an hour back. Sometimes I can do, 1,200 reps of that Jesus Prayer on my way, So this might sound, and of course it will, if somebody is not engaged in the faith at that level, say, of commitment, it might sound excessive, right? But I can tell you that for me, it's been absolutely life-changing in terms of controlling anxiety, in terms of inner peace, like a sort of inner peace that I have never found anything like in my entire life. And so, to each their own. But for me, it's been incredibly powerful.
Man, it makes a lot of sense to me as someone who's engaged in this kind of a thing to some degree. Definitely not as not to the level of volume probably that you are hitting, but I don't think people realize, like, your brain is going to go in all kinds of different directions anyway. We have like tens of thousands of thoughts arising every day, that most of which we're not aware of, and most of which are negative. And so what I'm hearing at the very basic level, even if the spiritual stuff doesn't even factor in, you're supplanting 10 to 20,000 of those random thoughts with peaceful ones. Mm-hmm. So just on balance, you're creating more peace in your mind by willfully guiding your mind in that direction. 100%. And then any spiritual or religious beliefs on top of that, which I 100% get down with. Now it's like you're doing spiritual push-ups, just thousands of reps of them a day, training your mind to bend towards that by default, just like we would train our bodies to be disciplined and strong by default. So
Amen to
I think
that,
it's fantastic, man. I have a couple of questions, actually. Yeah. Logistically, How do you
Yeah.
wake up? So like you said that you put on this channel at like 4 o'clock in the morning, but then you continue kind of drifting in and out of sleep. So do you have like an alarm at 4 a.m. and then you put this on and just kind of climb back in bed?
I actually don't really need an alarm because I've been an insomniac for the better part of 30 years. So I
Yeah,
generally
okay.
around 4, I'm up anyways.
Okay.
And this might have to do as well with the fact that, I was on call for all those years, and I
Oh
was
yeah.
I was getting up at 4:15 to work out. And then I
Yep.
had a string of CrossFit gyms that I would teach at, that I was an owner of, that I would teach a class at 4:45 for about 6 or 7 years. So I just have this,
It's your
excuse me,
body.
between sort of military PTs and ERT PTs early in the morning, and then all of a sudden 20 years of getting up that early so that I can get whatever it is I need to accomplished in a day, is just an automated response basically. But if in the event that I do plan to get up, say we have a workout at 4:15, because Alex and I will work out at 4:15 often if we can, and I will put my alarm then. But then what I do it a little bit differently. We'll wake up at 4:15. We'll go do our workout. I'll come back and have a quick shower, and I'll have a quick nap, 30 minutes. And during the 30 minutes, I'll be listening to my prayers. And so I kind of invert it a little bit if we're training in the morning. But if we're not training, I'll generally be awake. It almost never fails. At around 3:50, 4:05, between those two, I will get up. I will wake up, almost autonomously every day.
It's interesting to me just because like everything when you read these like old school books about
Mm-hmm.
manifestation, like Think and Grow Rich, and there's a bunch of these books that were written around the turn of the century, and it's super interesting to me because it's kind of this new agey talk, but written by these like titans of industry in like the 18 and 1900s. And
Mm-hmm.
it's one of the things they always talk about is this sort of like liminal space, either right as you're waking up or right as you're falling asleep. And it's almost like the most powerful time to plant new things into your subconscious. So that's why it stood out to me that you even said you have dreams kind of interspersed with some of these prayers sometimes.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
That's super
Correct.
cool.
But what you were talking about that's a very well scientifically documented process, right?
Totally.
And that's
Yeah,
one
totally.
that's one of the reasons why when people listen to a song in the morning, all of a sudden it's stuck in their head all day. If you look at the benefits of, say, fasting and getting up in the morning, and the sensitivity that you have to the first item that you put into your mouth after having such a flat blood sugar all night, and now all of a sudden you can spike it with an orange juice and sort of be all over the place, or you can take a meal that keeps your blood sugar regulated, and you're going to have this good response, this good outcome. Well, it's kind of the same with this. It's after you fasted from thoughts, from conscious thoughts anyways, and all of the things that you normally would be engaged in if you were awake, and now it's nighttime. Well, when you wake up in the morning, the first thing that you put into your mind is also critically important, just as the orange juice would be in the case of a physical fasting.
It's an interesting way to look at it, fasting from thoughts and then being careful about what you select to go in there. Is it a FPV drone strike video on Instagram or is it the Lord's Prayer?
Well,
Yeah.
so here's the thing. During the Lent, as you know, it's much more than just fasting for food. It's fasting for all the things that you are pathologically attached to. And one of
Yeah.
those things for me is unequivocally social media. I just, and that is a fact. And I can sit here and deny it as much as I want, but I do have a certain attachment
Amen.
to it, which is sometimes unhealthy. And during the Lent, I've limited my social media intake at 15 minutes a day. So that was one of the rules I implemented. But also, I was not allowed to look at it first thing in the morning. It couldn't be before 10 o'clock in the morning. And I
Yeah,
can
that's
tell you,
clutch.
man, during the 9 weeks of Lent, I have never felt so good about anything, and
100%.
and and so 9 weeks of that to establish a solid baseline. And then after Lent is over, I returned to my regular practice. And the reason why I did that was to see how it would impact me. And it took me no time to realize that when I look at social media first thing in the morning, before my prayers, or if I did, it literally sets the tone for the rest of the day. And generally, it has to do with anxiety. It has to do with not feeling so great about the state of affairs in the world, of having all these negative thoughts, of wanting to fight with people, all of those things. And so, which kind of leads me to perhaps a next point that's often negated, which is, what is it that you feed your soul? and how does it impact you? And so I'll give you an example of this. Very recently, I had a case study where, a guy that's reached into me for many years, when things aren't so good on the emotional and mental, side, ask me to jump on a phone call randomly, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely, let's do this. So I jump on this phone call, and in the back is blasting this hard work, kill your mom, kill everybody kind of music. And I stopped the conversation we're having, and I said, is that what you listen to all the time? And he was like, oh, I really like this stuff. I'm like, bro, do you think that's not feeding some of the demons, that you have? And I'm not meaning it in a biblical sense here. I'm meaning it in an emotional and mental sense. And then so it had me doing a very deep introspection of how I react when I listen to, say, gangster rap, which I was a big fan of for many years growing up. And when I train, I still will listen to it because I still really enjoy it. But the fact is, I listen to classical mostly when I'm driving, because it brings out of me a side of me that I do not like to interact with other humans in a relationship context. And that could be, somebody driving down the road, or me reacting a certain way, or having some sort of road rage incline, or whatever the case may be. And of course, I haven't had any of that for years, but one of the biggest reasons why I haven't is because I've controlled everything that enters my brain, because it does have an impact. And I think we're really understating that.
Hands down, I've definitely experienced that on the dieta preparation for ayahuasca. And I also experienced doing 5 grams of mushrooms the other day and reliving Tony Soprano's life, because I've been rewatching The Sopranos. And I was just struck with how anxiety inducing it must be to be a mob boss. So that was what I spent some time thinking about, because that's what I've been putting in my fucking brain, man. Because at the end of the day, when I'm washing dishes, sometimes I throw on Soprano reruns. Because I'm only human too, Seb.
Oh, that's so funny.
Man. It was pretty epic, actually. And yeah, I've had just like ridiculous things. I'm not sure where I've shared this before, but this one time on ayahuasca, I had images almost like the ayahuasca entities were showing me around a plumbing supply store. Like I was looking at like bathroom fixtures, like different shower heads and things like that. And I was confused. And I think the ayahuasca was confused too. And they're like, I guess this guy wants to look at this stuff. And I know it's because on Instagram, there's some plumber that I follow. And I just watch like fucking quick videos of him doing these plumbing installs and his commentary. I don't know why I do this, but I find the videos soothing. And so the medicine was literally like, I guess this guy wants to look at this stuff. So let's show him a plumbing supply store. So it really brought that into perspective to me of like, oh, I am fucking wasting my consciousness on this bullshit. And that's like harmless bullshit. It's not war footage. And I mean, right now as we're recording this, the US just bombed Iranian nuclear sites. So this shit's definitely increased level of awareness in all of our minds right now. Oh man. So yeah, maybe I got to start my day with a little bit more prayer like you're doing. And man, I've been in and out of phases like that. And there's no doubt that your entire day is better when it starts off on that path. And even if someone listening to this is like, well, okay, I'm not going to pray for 3 hours a day. This is why we start here in our microdosing program. Before we ever even microdose, we literally change habits and routines and how you start your day, because no doubt that sets the precedent for everything. Um, I actually want to rewind this conversation because I started asking you about saying a prayer before you eat. And, to us in the microdosing program, we set an intention before we microdose. And to me, it is a form of prayer. It's a way of communicating with the medicine, communicating with God. There's a lot that's wrapped into setting intention, but it also just brings this level of awareness to it. And like I've struggled, it's not like I have an eating disorder or anything like that, but I've definitely like, I overeat all the time. Like I'm like a dog, if there's food in front of me, I'll continue eating it until the food is gone, not until I'm full. And usually that ends with a stomach ache. And then that ends with not working out in the morning because I feel like shit. So that's something that I've played with, is like setting an intention before I eat, just to increase like that level of awareness around it. So I want to hear from you, because this is not something that you've been doing your entire life, right? Like you kind of came back to this faith or found this faith somewhat recently, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so what kinds of things have you noticed since implementing that? And then we'll circle back to how you got there. But like
For
since putting
sure.
this stuff into place, like how does this affect your day? Not just the morning like we talked about, but as
Hmm.
it continues throughout the day. Like what does that do for you?
Oh man, what doesn't it do for me is the answer,
Yeah.
really. I mean, it's one of those things where your inner workings want to jump on a rooftop and yell at everybody. If you think that that you understand what inner peace is like, here's what you should be doing, and you want to kind of go down that route automatically simply because it's done wonders for you. But I try to refrain from that because I understand that. I don't want to be pushing anything on anybody, but second, if you're not ready, then it just isn't the right time. And I know because I wasn't ready for a long time. And if somebody came to me with all of this, I would have been polite enough, but I guaranteed would have had maybe not an adverse reaction, but a reaction that wasn't conducive to any sort of learning from it. Really, I think. But to answer your question, for me, it's all about gratitude. And gratitude is the underpinning of everything. Gratitude is you focusing on the things that you do have as opposed to the things that you don't have and that you're still missing. Gratitude is a buzzword that's used extensively in a self-help department in mental and emotional journeys and all of the things, but it is highly misunderstood and definitely understated. Gratitude, and we're talking about purity of the heart here, and that's a very important thing. This is not a transactional gratitude piece. This is a heartfelt gratitude. That's very different from transactional gratitude, where I know I should be grateful, therefore I'm going to voice my gratitude, kind of thing. Whereas when you do it from the heart, because you truly understand and grasp the gift that you have, the gift of breath in your lungs, the gift of having a body that's capable of even getting you out of bed, and then you're going to go and engage with the food department where you have plenty of, and then if you're that kind of person, you might even dump some in the garbage, like not even considering the fact that others would kill to have what you have. And then you're going to do all of this, not realizing all of the people that are involved in getting that food to your table. And so you can really start your day for the first 2 hours discounting a million blessings that you have in your life, as opposed to setting a foundational truth of gratitude, which then, when it's impacted by adversity or impacted by other things, you have all these wins, all these micro wins that are consistent, that are fundamentally based in gratitude. And so now it makes a better balance. And really, this is what we're after at the end of the day. People are like, well, how do you get rid of darkness? Well, you don't want to get rid of darkness, because if you do, then you take light for granted. So darkness has to stay. But the key is to try to find a measure of balance. And this isn't a 50-50 balance. It can be a 70-30, or it can be, fluctuating. But it really, really does help. And so for me, in terms of putting into perspective all of the things that I'm truly grateful for, and forcing me sort of to introspect and exteriorize those, forces me to be understanding of what it is that I got. This is kind of like the person that's being asked to teach a jiu-jitsu class and they really don't know why they're doing what they're doing. It's going to be different than when they're entrusted with teaching others, and now they have to establish why it is that they're doing what they're doing, patronizing a certain movement pattern, and it gives them the ability to apply it and to create it and to preemptively do things that are going to lead to it, and all of the things. And so gratitude is exactly the same in your life. All of the things that we are looking for on the other side of that. And so that's what this brought me.
How did you actually get to the point though where you feel the gratitude? It's something that we talk about a lot. Like I used to roll my eyes at a gratitude practice, because I could list 10 things that I had and I still felt like shit at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And there is that word should in there of I guess I should feel grateful for this stuff, but I don't. So how did you cross that bridge?
Mm-hmm. Man, this is a really interesting thing for me. I for as long as I can remember, and I mean this very, very young, I've always been extremely grateful for everything I have. And I think there's two things that need to happen. A, you need to think that you are not entitled to anything. You need to accept that fact. Like, I don't care what society tells you. the fact is you're not entitled to anything. Everything you have that you get from anybody that, decides to give it to you either willfully, willingly, or transactionally is a blessing. Like nobody owes you anything, and the fact is, for me, it's never been something where I had to really work hard at feeling the gratitude, but I will give you some things that definitely increase my gratitude, and that's self-induced adversity, So for example, if you wonder what it's like to not have breath in your lungs, how about you go run a hard Metcon until you're on the ground on your butt with your legs up for the next 30 minutes because you now struggle to breathe, kind of thing. And as of course, as long as it's, done safely and all of the things, don't go just do random things. But as long as there's a method to the madness and some defensible actions that you are taking in relation to your fitness, for example, it's easy to get yourself in a position where, you're redlining and now you're really feeling what it feels like not to have proper breath in your lungs. That's just one example, right? Another example would be, say I travel to the city and I'm in the city for, say, a week or 2 weeks. Instead of looking at it like, oh man, I'm a farm kind of guy and I just want to be in nature, and really turning the experience in a negative, instead I'm like, this is my yearly reminder of how much I love the place I live in, because now I have the city to compare against. So now I can look at all the little things and stack up the wins for the farm life, side of the house, so to speak. And so there is part of gratitude is inherently in your heart. And I believe that the other part is a willful construction of it, where you're attentive, you're paying attention to what it is that's in front of you, and you are deciding what role it plays in your life and how grateful you are for either having it or not having it,
Yeah, man, this is something I think about a lot, is how much of this like healing kind of stuff, because we can agree gratitude objectively, it's a good thing for you.
Mm-hmm.
How much of this kind of stuff are we almost just gaslighting ourselves into by noticing it? And I actually don't think that that's a bad thing. Like, again, in our program, we have Gratitude Monday and we have Win Wednesdays. Because if I asked you, hey, Seb, how many red cars did you see last week? You're going to come to me next week. If we do that every week, you're going to come with a report of a lot of red cars that you've been noticing. So if week after week for 6 months, I ask you, what are you grateful for on Monday? And I ask you for 2 wins and a challenge you're experiencing on Wednesday, you're going to notice a lot more opportunities to be grateful. You're going to notice a lot more things that are going your way instead of just all of the challenges that you're confronted with. So even if it is a willful construction, like, we're constructing something. We're constructing our reality one way or another. So why not construct a reality where you're grateful for the things that you have and you feel like you have a sense of agency over the problems that you're encountering? So are you familiar with like the split brain experiments on the people with epilepsy? Oh man.
No.
All right. I would have to brush up on this to like accurately portray it to you. But back in the day, one of the treatments for epilepsy was that they would sever the corpus callosum, which connects the left and right hemispheres of your brain. And that allowed these people to do all of this research on like that. This is why we know what each side of the brain is responsible for, because you could feed information to only, say, your left eyeball, which only feeds information to the right hemisphere of your brain. And the takeaway of these experiments was basically that humans are constantly constructing a narrative to explain our experience, even if we consciously don't know why we are doing that. We're doing it all day long. And again, man, I bring up these experiments all the time, so I really should go fucking read up on it so that I can more accurately portray it to people. It's not very good of me to do that. But I think about that a lot. Like, we are constructing the reality that we live in, so why not construct a better one than the one that's been handed to you?
Dude, when people are talking to me about faith or about, what I chose and why I chose it and all of these things, I'm like, you know what I care about? I really care about the symptomology of your faith journey. That's all I care about. I couldn't care less what you do, who you believe in. What I care about is how does it make you act?
Okay.
How does it make you act? And so if it makes you act the way that we should with each other from a respect connection standpoint, from a humility standpoint, from all of those great assets for interpersonal relationships that we know. I'm in. It makes you better. I'm 100% in.
Dude, symptomology is an interesting word choice for that.
Yeah, I do.
You said before something about actions being symptoms of. You want your actions to be symptoms of the scripture that you read. So that
Correct.
Makes sense to me now. What you meant by that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you associate symptoms automatically with nefariousness, or medical issues, then you'll see it differently. But the fact is, symptoms are not inherently negative; they're neutral. But
sure, yeah, it's the consequence of the thing being there.
Sure, exactly. But to go back to what you were saying there for the cognitive bias, because what you were describing is cognitive bias, and this is why in my leadership courses or in the book that I'm writing with Sean Taylor, we discussed extensively the victim mentality, because that proliferates victimhood, right? And so for as long as you are in victimhood, you are going to be a victim of all of the circumstances, and you're going to be at the mercy of all the external factors endlessly until you decide to regain control of that tailspin and get back in the driver's seat, as opposed to be in the passenger seat with a driverless bus, But yeah, you're absolutely right, and this is the example that I use all the time. A car of color, somebody breaks up with you, and they have a blue Honda. All of a sudden, it looks like Honda has only produced blue cars for the last however long, and it's not rare to get on a light and have 8 blue Honda all of a sudden, And so now it creates this false sense of reality that blue Hondas have taken over the market, when really it may not be the case, but you are projecting what it is that you want to see, and you end up searching for it, and therefore you open yourself up to see it. And if you act with victimhood, you are going to project it absolutely everywhere. So according to you, the entire world is against you, and you're the only victim in this, And for as long as that happens, there is no recovering from that tailspin. Zero.
I shared how I used to feel about gratitude a moment ago, how I used to kind of roll my eyes at it. And to me, that's been one of the things that plant medicine has done, is taking it from this idea that existed in my head of sure would be nice to feel grateful, and planted it as something in my heart that I now actually do feel. And so it sounds like that's been something that's been there for you for a while. But the victim mentality thing is another thing I've seen plant medicine do for other people, where that exists in their head as an idea of I shouldn't be a victim, or I should look at these things as being within my control, but they don't know how to shake out of that. And the plant medicine, whatever way it enters the picture, kind of shakes up the snow globe and allows things to be reset a little bit. And so this is a direction I wanted to take this with you, is talk to me about the role that these things have played for you. And you can go into whatever depth or experiences that you want to. But I think maybe the first time around that we spoke, this hadn't really been something that entered your life quite yet, at least not to this degree. And now you've fucking fully drank the mushroom Kool-Aid, so to speak. So how have these things affected this path for you? Because obviously you've always been badass dude, always been in the leadership space. So that stuff's not anything new. The victim mentality, the gratitude, that's nothing new for you. So maybe it was the faith angle. I know there's some stuff there with connection to family that has come back for you. So how has the plant medicine world played out in your life?
I think I'm just going to start this with a bit of a disclaimer, and it's not a legal disclaimer, but it's just a disclaimer for people that are listening to this that understand, say, my faith, for example, because, in Orthodoxy, plant medicine is not condoned, right? Because it is seen as something that opens you up for spiritual attacks, and it actually does open you up for spiritual things. So you have to be, so, and that's the reason why there are professional settings such as what you guys are doing and everything that aims to circumvent this and get the benefit out of the experience. But I would say that the way that I have done it historically may or may not have been completely in line with preventing some of these spiritual attacks, and thankfully I was unharmed, so to speak, from a mental and emotional standpoint. But certainly there were some questionable things happening in there. But there was also some incredibly beautiful and powerful things that happened with me. And for years, I've researched so what I was interested in was macrodosing, right? Like the larger doses. So the 3 to 5, and then of course the 5 to 7, whatever, for what do you call it again? So you have the macro dose, and then you have the heroic dose, yeah. And so for me, here's what it did for me. Inherently, as humans, there's things that we're conscious about, and some things that we're absolutely not conscious about, and sometimes those things are catastrophic. For example, if you did something in your life, or if you were on the wrong end of an event, or if you've taken some actions that have hurt some people or whatever, to the point where viscerally you believe that you do not deserve to live, but you don't know that, there is nothing to stop this from bleeding in absolutely everything you do. And there is no amount of talk therapy that's going to fix that. And I nothing against talk therapy. It has its place, it has its things. But the bottom line is, there is a natural resistance to engage in these areas of our personality, or these deep inner feelings or thoughts, and your ego will protect you against exposing those. And so what plant medicine does essentially is kill your ego, or simply put it on the back burner and surrender. And surrender is a word that's used extensively in faith as well. And so those things are congruent. They're not different. They're real. You need to surrender in order to be the person, to elevate to the person that you want to be, rather than the person that you are currently. And so what happens with ego dissolution or ego death is that you are now able to look at the very, very, very dark corners of your inner workings that are going to expose to you what you really feel about you, and how you really feel about life, and what are some of the things that are bleeding you death by 1,000 cuts, so to speak, And so for me, the list is incredibly long of things that were revealed to me during my macrodose, especially on my first one. But I'll give you one example of that, and just for the listeners to understand how powerful that was. So, quick history lesson. So my mom was a 15-year-old Caucasian girl from Montreal, and my dad was Haitian from Haiti, and he was much older than her. He wasn't around, so I've never known him my entire life. The relationship was always between me and mom. And one of the things with mom is I never really remembered my younger years. I had sort of memory lapses. I remembered events, like single events, but I couldn't remember living or the daily living, so to speak. And so I never understood why. But also there was another symptom of this, of this situation, which was I had a hard time loving on mom the way I should have. Somehow she loved on me really hard, and I loved her, but it was very difficult for me to tell her. It was very difficult to exteriorize it. It was very difficult to hold her and look at her in the eyes and say how much I loved her and all of those things. And those are things I wanted to do. And so during my first macrodose, I questioned why I reacted a certain way to mom, and why was I, sort of impacted by something that I didn't know what that something was, that prevented me from being the person I should have been in my relationship with mom. Mom passed away in 2009 at the age of 48, and I never really got to go to the bottom of this prior to her departing this planet. And so, my advice to you is get it done so you have an opportunity to do it before a loved one is gone. But anyway, I digress. And so with mom, with the medicine took my hand and basically said, not in words, but in feelings, do you know what it's like to be a 15-year-old pregnant, in a world where your choices are not appreciated? Because of course, in 77, racial relationships in a place like Quebec that was very much not for mixing, people together had harsh consequences on her, of course. And there was a lot of events that I'm not aware of that occurred during her being pregnant and all of the things. And so after she was done as a 15-year-old, because we need to remember 15-year-old is 3 years older than 12, you know, that's how I kind of reframe it. And so I answered, no, I don't know what it feels like. And so the medicine took me right in her womb and made me feel every single one of the emotions that she felt when she was pregnant with me, right? And I didn't feel them in a theoretical sense. I felt them in a visceral sense. I felt them like I was her, you know, and I came to with tears flowing and just having so much gratitude for the amount of pain she had put herself through for me to be here today and bitch about the things that she has or hasn't done. You know, that it completely switched this whole paradigm. It was a giant paradigm shift for me, you know, at that very moment. And so imagine how long it would take for you to go to talk therapy and speak to a scientist or speak to a psychologist about things that you don't understand, that you cannot reasonably put in a right order, that has impacted you in ways that you cannot articulate, for only for the person receiving you to have professionally induced biases, personal biases, for memory to be a failing. Memory is not meant to recall things with any degree of accuracy. Memory is meant to record things to prevent you from repeating it or to encourage you to repeat it. So they're either safe behaviors or unsafe behaviors. Now, there's obviously some nuances in there and everything. I don't pretend to be an expert in this, but the fact is, we know that memory isn't built to recall events accurately. It's simply built to protect you, right? And so now you bring all these factors together and you're going to talk about things. And now your ego will get in the way because you don't want to expose some of the things. Some of the things are subconscious, so therefore you won't have any clue that it's occurring. And so you need something that can go really, really deep and that can remove all of the barriers. And once that happens, you can start tapping into the fundamentally catastrophic issues that you have as a human being. And once you start addressing those, everything else just falls into play.
It's a crazy experience, first of all. Was that the first journey that you went on?
Wow. Correct. Yeah.
Talk about a rebirth from these things.
No pun intended.
So what fell into place for you after that? What effect does an experience like that have?
Yeah, I mean, the impact was incredibly reverberating, right? For me in all aspects of my life. And I think one of those aspects was the forgiveness you refuse to give is keeping you in prison. You know, that's kind of like being in prison with the keys in your pocket. You know, I have the keys in my pocket, but I will refuse to unlock the door and I will stay right here and fundamentally believe things that aren't. And as a result of that, everything I do will be affected by how I truly think and feel fundamentally in my relationship with others, in my relationship with the world, with the universe, in how grateful I should be or not. All of those things are very, very deeply affected by the underpinnings of what you subconsciously feel about yourself. You know, it's the best way I can put it. And so for me, it literally, it did not affect me in a way that I slowly creeped back into the same routine, but it eradicated that part of me that somehow held a grudge for my 15-year-old mom for not having been the woman she should have been, you know, which I would know the first thing from having a kid at 15 and even making sure that that kid is safe in any way, shape, or form. And so it allowed me to forgive her, and it allowed me to forgive me for not forgiving her, you know? And so all of it led to some incredibly liberating thoughts, right?
Same. There's one quote that you hit me with from our first podcast that I've repeated over and over for the last 2 years. I think that's going to be another one. Forgiveness you refuse to give is what's keeping you in prison. Because we've seen this so often with the forgiveness that people refuse to give themselves. And I think you and I saw that unfold in real time at our retreat, which maybe we can talk about that as well. But again, like, what does plant medicine give to people? I think one of the things is the ability to forgive themselves. And we use the term grace a lot in our program. That's one of our Tobyisms. He talks about grace versus slack. But grace is an interesting thing as well. Obviously, it's tied very much into faith. And you can talk yourself in circles if you listen to Alan Watts' recordings talking about, well, how are we supposed to improve ourselves if we need improving? Well, it's through God's grace. Okay, if I haven't gotten God's grace yet, why not? Do I not deserve it? Who deserves God's grace, right? You can drive yourself mad with that line of thinking. But that's also what I'm hearing from you, is you gave your mom grace for all of the hardships that you went through because you understood her perspective. You gave yourself grace for being so hard on your mom because you had this new perspective. I have no question wrapped up in this. This is me being a very bad podcast host right now, but I think it's like the most paramount takeaway from psychedelics, I think, is forgiveness and giving yourself grace. And I'm still wrapping my head around your quote about like being in prison with the keys in your pocket, because that's what we do to ourselves, man.
We do. You know, one thing you said there that I think is worth jumping on briefly is that we don't earn God's grace. We have God's grace, but we must surrender to that, right? We can't, because it's our resistance that creates the friction point.
Explain that to me, because I wanted to ask you about what surrender means to you with your faith, because maybe that's another thing people resist. They're like, I don't want to submit. I'm a big, strong guy. But surrender is obviously part of psychedelics. So what does that mean in terms of your faith? Surrender.
Well, it means that the only path to grace, to full grace, is humility. And if you think I don't need to ask for grace, or I don't need to surrender to the process, which is basically understanding that you have a very limited field of influence. You know, people talk about spheres of control. I'm like, what do you control in your life? I'm just going to sit here and wait for you to tell me. Because, you know, at best, you have influence over things. And there's various spheres of influence, you know, in your life. And I think that as humans will extricate themselves from a restaurant to go hide in the bathroom as they are choking, they will invert the priorities of life by refusing to expose their vulnerability, even if it causes them death. You know, it's a very, very ingrained and built-in response that we have. Whereas the person that chokes in a public settings, that stands in the middle of the room, grab their neck and starts either yelling or making signs, I'm choking, will receive the help. Well, grace is exactly the same way. Grace, God's love, does not change. It's not fluctuating like us, like human beings, you know. It's not transactional, and it is also not conditional. It's unconditional. It's, you know, unconditional. So basically, there is no condition that changes it. The grace that you get or not get is the grace that you surrender to. And so if you want to remain in control and be the person that's, you know, cognitively engaged in everything and makes all the decision, and you're the big man and you're all of the things, then you don't have the humility necessary to engage in that grace journey. And so you need to humble yourself. And this is what the plant medicine does. So, you know, you asked earlier about this faith journey that I've been on. You know, a big part of that was what I was shown during my macro doses. You know, some very, very, very compelling things were shown to me during my macro doses. And this is where I first reconnected with God. But I just truly believe that there is a mistaken belief out there that even in the context of Christianity, that grace is something that we earn, you know. And it isn't. It's something that we surrender to.
How do you surrender? What does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. It's going to be a little bit different for everybody, but for me, it has everything to do with understanding that I have zero control and zero influence.
Yeah.
That I'm no good to make those decisions myself. That I need God to step in to guide me through those decisions. And I'm not talking about I'm going to take all of the important decisions, run them by God, and run my daily activities by myself because I'm in control of this. This is not a tiered approach. You don't have somebody with ranks that you're going to approach because they can deal with bigger problems or larger issues. This becomes a way of life where you're surrendering every single part of your life, and every decision that you make, all of the things are run by prayers before they are taken on, right? So for example, if you called me today and you said, hey man, I have this project in South America that I would love for you to be a part of, and all of the things, and you give me all the details, and we're having a cognitive conversation, and I'm gathering as much intel as I can. Before I speak to my wife, before I speak to anybody about it, I'm going to pray on it, and I'm going to surrender on it. I'm going to pray for discernment. Like, what are some of the things I need to be conscious of? And a lot of people will roll their eyes at this, and that's totally okay, because I would have been that guy. I get it. I totally get it. But it's understanding how viscerally transformative doing that is. And it is incredible the amount of discernment and the amount of clarity you gain from running it by God primarily. And so for me, it's not even a question anymore, because it's been proven so many times that I don't even have that conversation at all with myself anymore. Where I used to, maybe I forgot to run it by God, because it's transactional at that point, because I'm just kind of learning the ropes. But once you've experienced it in such a powerful way, it just naturally happens. Before this podcast, I asked God for me to find the words, for me to flow, for me to find the right angles to have the conversations on, and all of that. Whereas before I would have taken credit for doing that. Well, I've been on 2,000 podcasts, I should know what I'm doing and what I'm saying, and those types of things. And the amount of things I taken credit for that I shouldn't have is mind-blowing.
I was gonna make a joke, like I'm glad God gave you the green light to come on the podcast, come to the retreats and everything.
You did.
Man, one of my spiritual teachers says that we should act as if we are in control, but recognize deeply that you control nothing, because perhaps that can almost become a victimhood trap of like, I'm not in control of anything, so why should I try? Why should I bother? That's not the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you're talking about the symptoms, and so you're like, I don't care how you get there. I care that the symptoms are that these outcomes occur of you being a good person. And for you, everything comes back to the Bible. For me, that foundation is a book called the Bhagavad Gita. Mm-hmm. And in there, one of probably the central point that it's making is that you are entitled to your work, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your labor.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree.
you are not entitled to the outcomes whatsoever. The only thing you're entitled to basically is to try hard. And that's the only thing that anybody owes you. And yeah, man, I think that's beautiful that you ask God to find the words in this conversation. Cordy and I pray every night, and you might be inspiring me to make it more regular in the morning. One of the things that I always pray for is, I kind of blend the gratitude and the prayer. So I kind of thank God for the things.
Yeah.
As opposed to asking for things, thank
yes.
you for, and I know there's a subtle psychological thing there too, maybe, of like claiming that I already have this now instead of like I need to receive this. Mm-hmm. But thanking God for bringing people onto our path that we are meant to be serving and to be learning from. And it's almost silly because like I run ads on Instagram, right? And like we had a couple clients sign up from an ad, and then as we're working with them, literally one guy was telling me how he was praying for God to lead him on some path to help him with his healing, pulls out Instagram, sees my fucking ad, we have a conversation, he signs up for the program. Was that God? Was that the Instagram algorithm? Was that me being really good at Facebook ads? All of the above, I don't know, but it feels like it works, man.
Yeah, or it does. There is, so without kind of turning this into a bit weirder conversation.
Please.
one of the things that a lot of people do not know about is spiritual warfare, right? And I'm going to raise my hand here and say that I absolutely knew nothing about spiritual warfare. I didn't know anything about it until I started becoming very serious with my faith. And when that happens, I was under artillery fire incessantly. Like, we are talking the most vivid dreams you can possibly think of. Dreams that I have never in my entire life experienced. Things that would try to drag me into, rabbit holes that I was prone to or had a propensity for when I was younger, like lust and all these things that have not been a problem at all in my very happy marriage and all of the things. And really, what it was trying to do is to interfere with my faith journey by presenting to me things that historically have been an issue for me. And in a way that was so incredibly compelling and colorful. And, I read this, and I might butcher it here, but something along the lines of, the devil can't make hell beautiful and attracting, so he makes the way there beautiful and attractive, Yeah. And it was a very interesting revelation for me. And once you start engaging in the faith in a serious way, because let's make no mistake about it, if you're a dabbler, you'll likely never experience spiritual warfare because you're no risk, you're no threat at all. Like, you're somebody that acts a certain way, that goes to church on Sunday, that does the rest of the week does whatever they want, and then on Sunday you're back to church, and all of a sudden somehow, you're a Christian. But the reality is it goes far beyond that. And when you start dabbling into the things that are really, really at the core making you a strong Christian, there is forces trying to stop you, and that is absolutely undeniable, as crazy as this might sound to some people here. And I found myself in the middle of what I now know to be a battleground, not a playground,
Dude, I was in Peru one time preparing for leading an ayahuasca retreat. And we were sitting with our maestros, so the healers, the shamans, essentially, they call themselves maestros. And I was asking them some questions, and I said, okay, so we believe that, the medicine, we believe these plants have these spirits. We believe that they're benevolent. They're here to help us. And I said, so does that imply, if there are these benevolent spirits, doesn't that imply the existence of evil spirits? And he looked at me like I was a fucking moron. And he's like, yes, obviously. And now that, granted, these people have a unique way of speaking. They're very matter of fact about everything, to the point of almost feeling rude to our American and Canadian sensibilities. So he was just like, yes, obviously. And I was like, okay, so how do we protect ourselves from them? And again, he looked at me like, have I taught you nothing, David? And he was like, that's why we have, to them, he said, that's why we have our pipe and our agua de Florida, because they use the tobacco to cleanse negative spirits, as you see me puffed away on my tobacco pipe here. But yeah, man, if we believe there's light and there's dark, there's duality to everything. So if we're going to sit here and talk about a benevolent God that's helping us, there kind of has to be the implied existence of some negative force. And maybe we could talk about the power that it has or where it came from, or if it even can win, so to speak. But yeah, man, no doubt. The more I look at, you kind of just zoom out on everything in the world, that's kind of how I see everything. Social media, food, the structure of our society to separate parents from their children and enroll them in public schools, the pharmaceutical industry, everything, man. It's a subversion of everything that's good. And I think a lot of it is because the tentacles of those fucking negative forces are very wide reaching. Yeah, that's why you got to pray, smoke tobacco and burn sage. I don't know.
Yeah, brother. And that's exactly how it's fought. Those warfares are fought through prayers. They're fought through faith. They're fought through understanding that this fight, in my context, for example, in Christianity, that fight has already been won by Christ through the atonement of sins, by the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, right? And so for me, it's that battle is already won. So you're not fighting for, you're fighting from right? And so what it becomes is really, and as soon as, these thoughts would enter my mind and you think they're your own, so say, for example, if there's lustful thoughts coming into your mind out of the blue, you're like, why am I thinking this? Like intrusive thoughts coming in from somebody walking in front of you or whatever the case may be. It's like, that is actually not necessarily coming from you. If it's really out of the blue and that's something that's generally not the case and it generally doesn't happen, and all of a sudden you have this urge to, to really engage in that nefarious behavior, now you start realizing that there's other forces at play. And so how do you deal with that? Well, through prayers, through acknowledgement, through releasing the burden. So for me, it may look like, God, help me with these intrusive thoughts that I have. And I am a sinner. So, forgive me for being a sinner and having these sinning ways. And I'm unworthy of what it is, of the grace that you're offering me. But please stick with me through this process, and so here's the thing. The more profound my faith got and the more solid it was, the less impactful these spiritual attacks had. But in the very beginning, I was rattled. I was really rattled to the point of having conversations with some of my friends that are, that have been on that journey for a long time. And I'm talking about people that are very serious about their faith. And they're like, oh yeah, did you not know about this? And I'm like, no. Like, how does nobody know about this? Because this should be on the front page of the newspaper, I feel,
Well, I think that happens on every level.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, maybe you would disagree with this because it's maybe a sort of banal way of looking at the spiritual lens, but Stephen Pressfield, I talk about him nonstop. So he has this book called The War of Art, right? Where he personifies the resistance that we feel. And he'd say anytime that we try to go from a lower plane to a higher, whether that's starting a business, starting a diet, learning martial arts, or devoting yourself to your faith. He says anytime we try to do that, we encounter resistance. It's an inherent force of the universe, almost like the force of gravity is always there.
Yep.
And I almost wonder if that's the resistance on this spiritual scale or this faith scale, is these like negative, I don't know, like, do you chalk that up to like the devil? Is that like what your faith would call that, is like demonic forces, or how do you make sense of that?
Mm-hmm. So the answer isn't going to be traditional, because through orthodoxy, obviously, you would be looking at this through the eyes of the enemy, which would be obviously the forces of evil, right? So whether that's Satan or demons or whatever, it would be kind of looked at through that lens. But I am a very, very strong proponent of inherent interconnectedness. And I truly believe that all these multiple realms and all these things that are happening that we're very skillfully siloing are actually not siloed. They're all interconnected. And so I'm of the opinion that I don't actually know, for a fact what it is that is impacting certain things. And perhaps at times it's the enemy. Perhaps at time it's myself. Perhaps at time is, an extrapolation of my inner, deeper, darker thoughts, all of those things. And so I don't assign a specific causality to it necessarily, because I think that's part of the external realm that I don't have any influence or control over. But what I do have is the response to it. And so for me, with my faith, is to turn towards Christ, and everything has to do with Christ,
I like that a lot, man. Because, in our context, what we do, talk about like brain injuries, like TBI versus PTSD symptoms. And I'm like, well, they both manifest the same. So it's hard to tell what's what. But the good news is it doesn't really matter, because everything we're going to work on is going to address both of them. That's almost the same kind of thing that I'm hearing from you. It's like, I don't concern myself with where these things are coming from, because I know the solution to it, no matter what, is to turn myself towards this faith and towards what I know is serving me and what's good for me. I like
100%. And I truly believe that. I've got, I was talking about the Jesus prayer earlier, and so now what I have is, so just sharing this with your broader audience, I guess, is a non-event. But for 20 years, I spent 20 years in policing in some very critical role, and I've seen a fair share of catastrophic things. And for about as long as I was in policing, I would have dark, shadowy figures in my room at night. And this became such a normalcy in my life that it became something that I was laughing about, because I wasn't afraid of them per se, and they were just there hanging out. But I would wake up at night and look in the corner of my room and see dark, shadowy figures. And I just kind of laughed, smirk, and went back to sleep. That's something that just did not affect me seemingly at face value, but obviously does have an effect on you. But these dark, shadowy figures, appeared as a result of all of the things that I saw, all of the things that I experienced. But when I did a macrodose one time, the medicine asked me, "Hey," I guess the medicine was trying to show me darkness, and I'm like, my ego kicked in, and I'm like, good luck with that. Like, I don't care about darkness. You can show me as much darkness as you want. And then the medicine said, well, do you like darkness or dark shadowy figures or whatever she said? And I'm like, no, I don't necessarily. But she goes, why do you keep him there? And I'm just standing there going, I'm doing this, I'm projecting this. And so since that very macrodose, where I made a decision that I will not hang on to these nefarious entities, or whether or not they're nefarious, I don't know. I mean, they never actually did anything, so who knows? They might have just been a product of my imagination. They might have just been a product of my visions. It might, whatever it is.
Venus that you've experienced.
Exactly. It really doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, I was keeping him there, and being convicted of that was the way out. And so I could then start looking at, and this is the good news, a lot of people see conviction as something negative. I've been convicted of something, therefore I'm screwed. It's like, no, you've been convicted of something, so now you know exactly what you need to be working on, So it was a very, I was going somewhere else with this conversation, with this actual inject, but I totally lost it on the way, so I have no idea what I wanted to say.
I was going somewhere else with this whole podcast from the beginning.
Do you sometimes, I'm in the middle of a glorious idea, and midway through, I have no idea where I'm going with this?
All the time, dude. Like when you play The Sims and you delete their action mid-thing, and they're just like looking around the room, bro, that's half of my life.
Oh, man.
Oh, man. Awesome. Dude, I don't know. I could ask you weird spiritual questions all day.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, just kind of generally, maybe to tie this back to the fact that other people will listen to this. How do you? Okay, actually, let's go here. What we're talking about here with these kind of like dark forces, the faith, the plant medicine. How does that tie into somebody else's experience with PTSD? Because obviously a lot of people are going to listen to this and they won't have any faith yet, maybe because they haven't had these experiences. So, a police officer who's seen some shit, a veteran who's been through some shit. What is your, how do you make sense of that experience? Like, what do you think the mechanism by which it is that they are plagued by this stuff? And how do they go about changing it or correcting it or healing it? With the point of view that you have now, not just of your 20 plus year tactical career, but also the mushrooms and also your faith. How do you make sense of the world in which people have these PTSD experiences?
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's a very multi-layered answer. So it's a simple question.
Just a rapid fire one to wrap up our podcast. Just, quick thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I think that understanding that the reality is for these people is real. This isn't fallacy. For some of them, it's physiological. Sure. For others, it's deeply psychological. For others, it might even be on a spiritual realm. There's a variety. And again, all these realms are interconnected. So it's very hard to differentiate them. But ownership is the key. In order for you to get out of any dark hole that you are in, you're going to need to take some actions that will feel extremely uncomfortable. And that would push someone to perhaps stay behind a certain label that they either self-assigned or were assigned by society or by a psychologist or whatever, as an excuse not to be taking action in relation to the said label, right? But again, this is like being in prison with the keys in your pocket once again. And so I think that what needs to be acknowledged is this is an imperfect journey. There's going to be some 3 steps forward, 4 steps back sometimes, and that is okay. That's a part of the process. But what needs to happen is something needs to be done differently. And what I am seeing all the time is a very, very strong, especially in my case in the law enforcement world, is a very strong resistance to surrender control, or a very strong resistance to drugs, for example, because that's how people will call them instead of plant medicine. Yeah. And I think that gives them an opportunity to remain status quo and not engage in a certain behavior that could change their world on account of the label that they've assigned to it, or the amount of their, or the label that their service has reinforced through, enforcement actions or whatever. And some of them even feel guilty for having charged people with certain crimes and now engaging in the very thing that some of these people were doing. And so there's a lot of inner battles that are occurring there, especially with Leos and in the military world as well. So 2 things. Sometimes the label that you have or the condition that you are in feels more comfortable than the steps that you have to take to get out of that situation. And that is a very, very nefarious thing, and it's very insidious in nature, and it bleeds you from the inside, and it's very difficult to recognize. And so it becomes a question of the evil you know. It perhaps feels better than the evil you don't know. And so that's one piece. So I would say first and foremost, there has to be a surrendering that happened, that this might get worse before it gets better, so that I may expose the things that are hurtful, and deal with them. But everything that's exposed can be addressed. It's what is not exposed that cannot be addressed. And now with that, that's not going anywhere. Here's for the bad news. If you close a drawer and you sit there and you go, you know what, I've been fine for 10 years, I'll be fine for another 10 years. These thoughts, these repressed feelings, these emotions, the impact of the stuff that created the issue in the first place, while confined in a drawer, sounds like a great idea. It multiplies. It multiplies and it amplifies. And so by the time the door opens willfully, or the entire drawer explodes, those things are going to come out with a vengeance because you've refused to address them, right? So there has to be a willingness that this isn't perfect, and stop rationalizing everything you do, because, this has 70% chance of this, and this has and then you start getting cognitively involved in this, which prevents you from having faith that certain processes that have been used for thousands of years have potential benefits, therefore taking them off the table for you. And then B, it allows you, and I say this, with reservations, it allows you to remain in a position where you can continue either complaining or not addressing the rest of your life on account of the condition that you're in. So it allows you sort of a scapegoat, so to speak, like a spiritual scapegoat. And so for me, 2 things. You need to understand it might get worse, and you need to have the curiosity to want to engage in things that you have not tried. And when people are arguing with me about, and not arguing, but when people are arguing a point against or whatever for some modalities, I always ask the same. Does everything you do work? Has everything you've done worked for you to the point where you're good to go? If the answer is yes, you don't need to have that conversation with me. I'm convinced that everything you did was perfect for you, But if you look at your life and you're being honest and you go, is this working? And if the answer is no, not at all, even if I portray it on my social or whatever the case may be, if inherently, just between you and you, if you can tell that the thing isn't working, then you must do something different, And that something has to be drastic enough to flank all of the defense mechanisms that you have up,
Glad that I posed the question to you in that way, because your answer just kind of confirmed or put a little bit more steam behind something that Cordy and I have actually been working on a little bit behind the scenes, which is that we talk to so many people, mostly on Instagram. You know, I spend a lot of time on there, but a lot of
Mhm.
guys who are active duty law enforcement, and they have so many fucking problems. And
Mhm.
most of the time, their plan is to just pretend everything's fine until they retire, because getting help jeopardizes their career, which sucks. Obviously, that's changing a little bit, but it still
Mhm.
seems to be the norm. And these people can't participate in our microdosing program because that would also potentially lead to them losing their job. And so we're working on building something that basically takes all of the other elements of our program and brings it to these people in an accessible way. Because what you just shared of basically, hey, recognize things are going to get worse before they get better. Surrender to the fact that you don't have all of this shit under control. You have to take a different approach that's going to outflank your issues. I like that way of looking at it. All those things are possible without plant medicine necessarily being in the picture. Will you outflank every single one of those demons without 5 grams of mushrooms? Maybe not. But can we definitely open up that drawer that you talked about and start sorting through some of the shit that's been in there? 100%. And you know, you've probably heard us use that analogy of shadow work being like taking off your backpack and taking stock of all the rocks that you're carrying. That's kind of what I'm hearing is the primary issue is shutting that drawer and pretending like everything's fine. Meanwhile, those demons in there are fucking multiplying and they're gonna come get you.
Yeah,
So
and
go ahead.
oh, sorry. I was just gonna say. I was just gonna say. When you think of making your life better, so think of it this way: humans are creatures of extremes. We go from one side to the complete opposite. You know. So now you have a lot of darkness in your life. You want to go to the complete light. It's like not realizing that any candle that you can light up along the way is creating a glow that reverberates in the darkness so much. And so when people ask me, how long does it take to get a black belt in jiu-jitsu? Well, it takes, a long time, but it takes you one day to be better than yesterday, you know? And so that's the same thing. It's the recognition that every step you take towards betterment is a day that alleviates the suffering or some of the suffering that you are dealing with on the daily. And so it's not about the end goal of achieving a state of freaking, what's the
Enlightenment.
homeostasis, like a state of
Okay.
homeostasis where you get to a
Sure.
perfect balance and everything. That is not, if that's your end goal, you're going to talk yourself out of taking daily actions that could really be beneficial for you along the way, make your daily operation smoother and better every day on account of, I want the outcome, but you don't get the outcome if you don't take the micro steps. And the micro steps are sustainable where we're aiming on the outcome and having this sort of anticipatory rewards need where I'm only going to be rewarded once I get there doesn't lend itself to any sort of consistency because it's very difficult to stay motivated and engage in that process. But if you understand that every step you take, that every little bit you can take out of the backpack and address is one less thing that festers, that creates, offsprings and that are going to eventually add to the totality of the circumstances. And so it's not about being optimized. It's about the journey to optimization.
Sounds like you've been reading the Bhagavad Gita, bro. You're not entitled to that outcome. You're only entitled to that path.
100%. But here's the thing. I'm gonna bring something to you here.
Sure.
So one of the most compelling sort of evidence of faith for me and how it swayed my faith was the fact that everything that we talk about, whether it's in the current times, whether it's stoicism and its approach to dealing with and regulating emotions, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's gratitude, whether it's all of those things, every single one of those things are in the Bible. Every single one of them, without a single exception. Every modality we've ever spoken about, everything that we know to be beneficial is in there. It's like the ultimate book of everything that we are looking for. I see people, oh yeah, I'm on this stoicism thing now. But now they're running out of balance because they're injecting 100% towards stoicism, maybe misunderstanding some of the underlying concept, and then they're applying it in a way that's actually not necessarily beneficial all the time in the relationships and the connections, all of the things. So now you've taken something in isolation, right? When you take something in isolation and you implement it, the chances of you knowing when to dose it properly is non-existent. And especially if it has any good repercussions, you are very likely to just add more of it because clearly it has to do better,
right?
And this is what we do when you drink, you have a beer and it's fun and it's pleasant. Next thing you know, you're, 20 ounce into a 40, and now at the end of it, it's no longer pleasant and it's no longer good. Now you're hungover, you've been sick, you've made some questionable decisions, you've done X, Y, and Z, all of the things. And so the difference between, say, the information that you find within scriptures is that everything is in balance. Whereas if you take it out of context and you isolate it, now you have to try to balance it. And that's the difficult part. When I realized that, I told my wife, I'm like, did you ever notice that everything that the world is using to get better is in the Bible? And she's like, yeah, I'm finding that out because she had never read it either. How many people haven't? Anyways, so I digress on that, but it's just a very interesting piece. These things that we do, they need to be in context, because if they're not, they can become an impediment rather than a support.
Absolutely, man. And I like that idea of having it all be in balance. And yeah, I've also not read the Bible, but I completely believe what you're saying. Like all of these, it's the most enduring book in the world for a fucking reason. Right? Like it's all in there. I got no other questions for you, Seb, at this point, other than like weird directions that probably aren't suited for a podcast. Dude, I do want to circle back and touch base with you at some point. This will be off the air about this other project that we're working on. Because, dude, there's too many fucking law enforcement officers that I've talked to who want to microdose and they just won't. And we do have one active duty guy in our program right now who shall remain nameless. And it's so funny, we have this big long intake form. One of the questions, the way we phrase it is like, what's your relationship with cannabis these days? And his answer was mostly busting people for it. I was like, that's awesome. Dude, you've given me personally quite a bit to think about actually in terms of like my faith. You've always been someone that I've looked up to and like who's been inspiring. And I like talking to you because you reframe things in interesting ways. To the point that like it's gotta be exhausting sometimes, dude, being inside that brain of yours. Just the fucking way you think about stuff, man. But I am personally excited to go back and re-listen to this because I think some of the things that you said are really golden just in terms of how to frame thinking about PTSD, how to think about healing, how to think about having faith and what that means and why you should and how to deepen it. So, dude, as always, I appreciate every time I get to talk to you, Seb. And again, no pressure, but I'm really expecting my life to continue to work out much better after the round 2 of this podcast because so much unfolded after round 1. So, man, I really appreciate you, dude. I appreciate your time. And also, I got to level up my background game because I just have this one cool painting and you got a fucking samurai sword back there and your black belt and all this other stuff. So I got a lot of leveling up to do on the other side of this conversation. Man, on your end, any other parting thoughts or wisdom or closing arguments here? Anything else you want to say, or do you feel like we've kind of covered it and it should just be weird other spiritual stuff that we don't talk about on a podcast?
No, I think what I would like to do is a bit of a shameless plug for our book. Obviously, that I
wanted to ask, like, when's that available? Where's it?
Yeah,
available?
so I'm thinking to publishing 3 or 4 months is what I'm thinking. So I started my own publishing house called Farmhouse Publishing.
Really?
Yeah, and the book is gonna come under my own publishing house, of course, and. What I can tell your viewers and what I can tell you is that the book is probably the absolute best articulation of all these different concepts that we have gone into, plus many more. And so the book speaks about a lot of things. Do you want me to rattle them off quickly?
Please. I also want to know if there's a title, because last time we talked, there wasn't.
Well, we have to wait for the approval. There's a tentative title,
Okay,
so I won't be able to engage in that. But let's just look at the chapters. So each of those are chapters, okay? So I'll quickly rattle them off for you people so that they understand what's coming down the pipe. So responsibility, authenticity, resilience, empathy and compassion, curiosity, discipline, self-awareness and emotional regulation, healthy relationships and boundaries, personal wellness, purpose and meaning, critical thinking and discernment, humility and open-mindedness, courage and authenticity, once again, gratitude and interconnected awareness. And then there's a workbook and a case study book as well. So the chapter 15 is a workbook and this chapter 16 is a study book. So this is meant to yield into integration. So this isn't just a book that you read and you put it on a shelf and you're done. It's a reference manual that has an integration chapter to help you integrate these concepts in your life. And I cannot tell you how truly excited I am to be releasing this, because it is mind-blowing. It's a project that we worked on since 2021. It is mind-blowing. So far, all the cold eye reviewers we've had have been just stunned. And I think there's nothing like it on the market. And so, when the time comes, I think you and I should get together and kind of do an episode on that. But something to be looking forward to.
Sounds like a field manual for feeling good about your life.
For being good about your life.
Well, I wanted to say feeling good about your life because not just having a good life, but feeling good about the things you are engaging in and doing and how you are moving through the world, because it comes from a place of integrity. So,
100%.
Not just saying reading this book will make you successful and have a good life, but you will feel good about the way that you are living. That's what I meant by that.
You're going to optimize essentially your experience. And there is no question that that's the case. A lot of this is science-based. A lot of this is spiritual. There's some spiritual components. Everything is intertwined. There's no disconnection between all of those realms. They're all infused within the confines of the book all along.
How will people be able to get it? Is it going to be sold through Amazon, just through your site? What's the distribution? Yeah.
No, we're going to, we haven't ascertained that quite yet, but it's going to be, rest assured, it will be through Amazon, through all of these different book, and we're going to have an audio book. We're going to have all of the things like.
Who's reading it? You or Sean?
Well, if we're actually recording an audio book, it's probably going to be two of us, probably.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, last question. Does Farmhouse Publishing have any interest in a conspiracy theory children's ABC book? Have I told you about my book, dude?
No.
Oh, bro, it's fucking good. I wrote this entire kids book, rhyming of the ABCs of conspiracy theories. Obviously, it's not actually for kids; it's for dads. But it's fucking hilarious. I'll show you some of this.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, I'm like completely serious. I want to find a publisher because this thing's gonna
You
be
are
awesome.
pretty funny.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll share you some of this with you. It's kind of awesome. So Farmhouse Publishing will have a very unique niche of what kind of books it puts out.
Roger, for sure.
Dude, thank you very much for your time, man. Appreciate
Thanks
you very
for having
much.
me,
I'm looking forward to the book, and we'll leave it there. We'll do a round 3 when the book comes out. All right.
Sounds good, brother.
All right, guys, that's it for this one with Seb. If you want more of what you heard, Seb's literally done thousands of podcast appearances with various people over the years. So hopefully this one was interesting and engaging for him. Hopefully I asked some different kinds of questions than he's used to fielding. And hopefully for you, there were some good takeaways. I know there definitely were for me. And by the way, if you want to hear more about Seb's origin stories, we cover that on an old episode. If you want to dig through the archives, you can find that. I'll put some relevant links in the show description in the notes where you can find more Seb on Instagram, on his website, and this will likely be released a little bit closer to his book publishing date. So I will provide info on that as it all becomes relevant and accessible. So as always, thank you very much for listening. Till next time, peace out. Hare Krishna.